Yes. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to already the fifth recruitment webinar in the webinar series, The Art of Recruitment. And today we have a very, very special guest because today I'm happy to introduce and announce that my co-founder, Maarten van der Kwaak, is one of our speakers. Before I introduce Maarten, let me tell you a little bit more on how we run these webinars. If this is your first, if you have any questions, just ask them in the chat. I will be your host and monitoring the chat. Maarten won't be able to see the chat, but if there are any urgent questions, I will just bluntly abrupt Maarten mid-speech and ask your question. If we can wait till the end of the presentation, we will just save up all of your questions because there's a lot of ground to cover and there's a lot of content that Maarten is going to share with us today. Of course, if we go too fast, the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel in the next few days, and you will receive the recording as well in your inbox. But I'm super happy to see all of you live because that's where the real magic is, and that's where you get the real benefit of connecting with other people in the chat. So don't be afraid to send your LinkedIn contact details in the chat and connect with other people that are interested in this topic. And as well, this is your opportunity to ask Maarten all of the questions that you have. So why did we ask Maarten to join us as one of the keynote speakers? Because Maarten not only is co-founder of Matchr, but Maarten is actually a serial entrepreneur in the recruitment industry. As a student, he already started his first recruitment business on the side while studying two studies, finance and law. And over time, he actually founded 3 more companies, of which his second to last, so before Matchr, he founded Apollo Executive Search, whereby he helps PE and VC-backed companies with their C-level and management roles -1 to help them find the right people for those type of roles. So Maarten is an absolute expert on how do you find and how do you hire C-level executives. And Maarten is going to share not his experience from Matchr, but he's going to experience and talk from his perspective of what it's like to be the co-founder of Apollo and experience that comes to placing successfully candidates on C-level roles. Maarten, welcome. Very happy to see you here. If you guys took notice, you might see that we have a very, very similar background. And that is actually because Maarten came to visit me here in New York, and we're sitting one phone booth behind each other. So that's why we have the similar background. Maart, great to have you. Are you ready?
I think so, Adrian. I think there's no
Awesome.
choice.
Awesome. No choice. Exactly.
So welcome everyone. It's great to see the different backgrounds. Also, the hello from Kuwait to learn about executive search is awesome to see, and the enthusiasm in the chat, as Adrian already announced. I will be. I'm not such a technical guy with 4 screens simultaneously, so I'll just do the Alt tab between my 2 notes and the presentation. So I won't be able to see what's happening in the chat. So Adrian, do post everything in the chat,
Yeah.
and Adrian will sort of ensure that the questions come with me. I will have some questions for you as well to see how things are done with you or what you feel about stuff, but we'll get there along the way. I'll start sharing my screen.
Perfect. All right. Now I'll go off screen, Maart.
I think now everyone can see my screen, right?
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, so it's about how to attract and select C-level executives, as Adrian announced. So Adrian already gave most of my introduction. So I studied in Groningen, did an INSEAD MBA, and have basically various recruitment firms, ranging from students needing to find their first job up to executives looking for potentially their last job. And what I found out over the years is that despite the similarities in process, and I think we will see a process, and also when I discussed it with Adrian, he said, but it's a recruitment process. Recruiters know this process as well, Adrian. With executive search, there are some things still slightly different about the process, or at least in my opinion. But again, during the webinar, do let me know when you feel otherwise about specific things. For me, it's really a profession in itself, and it's different than what we do in Matchr, and it's different than we do in the campus business, even though there will be, of course, many similarities, because the basics of the process is still finding the best candidate for a specific role to join your team. What's the first thing that's different about the leaders? It's the impact that they have on the company. So this is Forbes. If you will Google for it, you will find various sources stating what the impact is of an excellent versus a decent versus a bad executive. But the conclusion will be the same, whether it's 4.5 million net income contribution for top 10% great leaders, or it's, I don't know, 6.2 or whatever. And the deviation that you see that even between the middle 80% of leaders and the top 10% great leaders is a factor of 2. So on an annual basis, on average, the net income contribution to the bottom line is plus 4.5 million for a great leader. Again, as I said, you need to look at the numbers sort of in scale, because it's different for a small startup versus a corporate. But the factor of 2 doesn't really change. Only the income contribution will change. So it's key that you spend time and effort on finding, selecting, and hiring your leaders. Which is also why it sometimes strikes me as very strange that executives can be hired in like a very incidental, haphazard kind of way, either following the same processes that are used for like normal employees, or just bumping into someone and hiring him or her for a position which that person, in the worst case, has no experience with in his or her former background. So it's a process that requires real caution, as the impact of it is basically huge. So don't treat it as just another hire. Really treat it as distinct. So what are then, for me, the key takeaways of this process? It's really about, if as a recruiter, and as a recruiter you are not always involved in these types of processes, and which can be for various reasons that you're not involved. But if you want to be involved, it all has to do, as everything within recruitment to be successful, with proactivity. And the proactivity starts with understanding your surrounding, understanding the business that you work in. To be really a business partner to your management team, do know what's going on, do understand the implications for people, and in that way be the sparring partner to help them, your management, to strengthen the whole organization. It's, as a process, it's generally a very intensive process, as the impact of it is huge. On average, you will be spending more time on it, you will go more in depth. So it's going to take a lot of management time, and management time is often the scarcest factor in the organization, which is also something that you should be aware of if the management team wants to sort of hide and not be involved. Push them to be involved, because the only way to establish who to hire is to have the commitment of the people around this person. So time, energy, and resources will have to be invested in that, and your role is also to help them do that and push them to do that. And where does it start with? To identify what you actually need. This sounds very basic, but we will go into it later, and also I can give some examples, for example, from my Matchr history, where even for me, it isn't always that straightforward to get to a good identification of your real need. The second point, which is really important, is understanding the difference between good and excellent. And because as you saw, the middle 80% good leaders and the excellent leaders still have a factor of 2 in impact around them. It's hard to assess the difference between good and excellent. I will elaborate on that a bit more, how you can try to do that, and what people should interview when we get to the process side of things. But it's really, if you see something that's good, someone that's good, don't directly jump into it, unless there is, of course, sufficient proof points. But be careful. And the process needs to be rigorous, transparent, and with predictive value, which also basically comes back to what I just mentioned around seeing the difference between good and excellent. How can you go into that? We will address that with the process. And as I also mentioned, really, really, really have commitment. And that holds for you, and that holds for the entire organization. Because you might see what a great company you're working for, often when someone starts interviewing, he's read some basics, he's seen some stuff, but he doesn't breathe the story yet like you're doing. So really ensure to commit time and effort to take them along and to convince them to join you as well. So then the question is, as I said, recruitment is not always involved, but what are prerequisites to be involved? When will the management in general involve you? And so the first thing is that you really try to understand where the business is going. And that's sort of a continuous thing. You ensure that you have an idea of the direction, what products or services will be added in what pace, and what will it require to successfully add this. So where do you want to go? What do you need for it? And from a people business, if you understand that, you can think along with them. So in terms of really understanding your business, I have a question for the group. Like, what kind of things do you do on an ongoing basis to understand what your company is doing and where it's going?
I'm monitoring the chat, Maarten. There's a slight delay always in the chat.
Yeah.
So can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so what do people do to really understand the business that they work in? And to really understand where is your company going in the next month, years?
Right. Let's see who is entering in the chat. Please answer in the chat, guys. Listen to company business reviews from Tasha. Dan says read company mission.
Yeah.
Good points. Anything else? Come on, guys.
If I summarize it very bluntly, you get to read everything that's available on your company, preferably internally, because that will be the most information. But what I didn't hear yet, like, speak to your management. And in the past, pre-COVID, it was more on the Friday drinks. Now it's on the virtual Friday drinks, or however you might be organized, to ensure that you are up to date. At Matchr, we really try always to keep everyone up to date with a very transparent company presentation on a monthly basis. But even then, there's more to know. But if you want to know what happens to your business, just speak to the management team, because they will also always be super engaged about the company and would be more than willing to tell you where does it go. And if you understand the business and where it's going and know what the management wants, you can start thinking along. And again, you need to envision the management also always has limited headspace. So in a way, it's easier to always be a step ahead of them and really start the process before they think about starting it. And if you initiate the process, so again, the productivity, the chances that you will be involved are much higher. So you can really drive the people agenda, and they will be very happy if you come with an overview of what is needed, when it is needed, and of course, depending on the environment. But I think many people are also from startup kind of environments. Things will change, but at least you can guide what's happening. Another thing that's important, so you've thought about everything, you know where the business is going, you know what is needed when, but then you think, okay, so now I know what we need, where am I going to find it, and what's out there. So it's about understanding the landscape. So going deeper on the position, are there various types of the position? How does that work? How do they compare? What are the differences, and what would suit us best? And what good looks like? And actually, in addition, also, what do you need to pay to get excellent and good? And the last thing is basically drive the process. You as a recruiter can always be in charge of these kind of processes. If you know in 6 months there will be hired, you can timely start with detailing a timeline, communicating a timeline, including stakeholders, etc. If you are initiating the things, then the chances that you are involved are, of course, much higher, because they will tend to follow. So it's one of the most important recruiter traits, being proactive, and proactivity is also really required if you intend to be involved in these managerial processes. Yeah, I'm telling this mostly from the in-house recruiter perspective, as I think most people have this background. Of course, I can switch perspectives, but sort of the basic lessons are similar. Because also, if you're working from an agency, you need to understand what client are you working for. You need to understand what they need, what are the differences, and you need to lead the process. So what will we discuss today? How do you define what you need? As I said, that sounds easier than it is in real life. And what's your role? Really be involved in the agenda and understand where it's going. Another topic is compensation. For you, it's important to speak around, know what needs to be paid, and be able to be an advisor in there as well. How to run a process? Well, that's also, as I said earlier, you know how to run the process. It's slightly distinct, so draft a distinct and tailored process for the role. And then it's about how to convince a candidate to join your team. And very often what you see for C-level hiring, if it's more not in the private equity type of environment, but more in the venture capital type of environment with scaling companies, people want someone to join as a CFO of a business of 60 people, and the business of 60 people wants to move to 500 people. So what do they want? They want to have a CFO who managed the business of 500 people. But if a CFO of a business of 500 people gets approached for a business of 60 people, what's the first thing you will think? You think, okay, am I going to work with an organization that's 10% of the size that I'm managing now? So you need to convince this person that it's 60 now, but that it's much more attractive to join. And again, thinking about the needs, it's similar for all roles. Always you need to think about the candidate needs, but it's even stronger for the executive roles, because the executives will have much more commitment with the company. It will be a longer term commitment, incentivized by equity, etc. So for them, it's a much more cautious decision. A more specific one is the CEO, for which it's really crucial. I won't dive too deep in there, but if we see CEOs who have been in the job less than 5 years, we always think it hasn't been a success, and that's the only role for which it's really that specific. So it means that the CEO will do so much due diligence, because in order to be successful, he needs to do at least a 5 to 7 year stint in a successful way. And so they will be really cautious about addressing everything. So really take that perspective. And then the last part is, okay, if you go external for help, how do you identify and work together with a headhunter, which is a lot about being and remaining connected in your market. So then we get to the what do you need? And then every time I split the things in what are the sort of worst practices we feel and what are the best practices we feel. And so something I already referred to not to do is going too quickly into hiring. Also, a very common mistake is like talking to people from other companies, but companies which are not comparable. It could be in size, in industry, in maturity. Ensure that you are comparing like for like. And you can speak to different companies, but be aware of what's relevant for you. What we also often see is that the things have not been discussed with stakeholders, again, especially in the venture environment, where the investor hasn't been asked for permission, etc. And even though that's mainly the responsibility of the CEO, etc., still for you, you are the driving force behind this process. And as the driving force, you should sort of prevent every road bump that could potentially arise. And also something to be very careful with is don't start with profiles, because then you will get sort of goal freak. So you see someone, a friend from you who did finance in your student dorm or whatever, and then you think, okay, he can be CFO, and then you are going to basically draft the profiles, the job description towards this profile, because you think, okay, this works. So be cautious and really think about what you need. as I mentioned, it's not that with me this is all going extremely well. With Matchr, we are looking for a head of RPO for quite a while now. Didn't find the right person yet. Have spoken to very different profiles along the way. So you could argue that we didn't know what we actually needed, but actually we needed this to understand what we need. So I'm not saying that what we did is best practice, but it's only worst practice when it's the moment when you directly act on it. So we were very cautious about do or don't we want this, and didn't jump into it. So it's not necessarily bad. Be careful, but do think as much in advance as possible. And best practices, plan for today and tomorrow. And there are some different views on that, but I mean, especially in a dynamic environment, you can schedule for in 3 years, but like if you look at COVID, no one would have known what would happen 3 years later, even though we're not yet 3 years later. But really hire for today/tomorrow, and don't take it to a long-term view. Be specific on where you are. Speak to candidates to validate the profile. What we often do as a headhunter is, as a client, it's very easy to describe, okay, what do I need? And then they come with these very generic descriptions. He or she needs to have a managerial experience in a production setting. It should be a team player who is good at stakeholder management. And you get all these generics. Which is good, but we try to iterate as quickly as possible with like dummy profiles according to different strategies to calibrate on with the management team, so that they directly can say, okay, this is what I like, and this is why, and this is what I don't like, and this is why. As soon as you start speaking to about profiles, is when you really understand what you need. Again, this is, as I said earlier, a lot will be recognizable from the recruitment processes. So some of it might be repetition, but I think a repetition is also an art in order to do well what you need to do well. And document carefully what you need. So write down, okay, what is it that we need, and measure on that throughout the process, because it's easy to get distracted from what you think you need. In that perspective, I also have a question, like how maybe people can like say yes if they ever hired people too quickly when they didn't really know what role they hired for.
One more time on the question, Maarten.
Yeah, so type yes if you've ever hired someone when you really didn't know what you needed, but that was more sort of an opportunistic hire.
Already 3 yeses in the chat very quickly.
Yeah. It's and even though it's my profession, I did it as well. So no one also in the recruitment community is perfect. And so the practices are mostly to sort of help you. This is to prevent the human mind from taking over and taking bad decisions. Actually, but it's a key step. So what should compensation look like? The worst practices, treating employees the same as founders. We often see, like, again, then more in the scale-up community, founders pay themselves a limited amount of money and don't want other people within the business to make more money than they do, with which you forgo a lot of talent. So really challenge your founders on that. I think Adrian wrote in his blogs, like, for how long, Adrian and myself, when we started Matchr, we didn't even pay ourselves a salary because we put it all in the business to grow the business. With Apollo, we did the same in the beginning, and with basically all of my businesses, I did it that way. Because as a founder, if you start a business, you believe in the value that you build, and you don't believe in the annual cash. And your hires will boost the value. And if you think that someone is not worth more than that salary, that's fine. But then maybe you shouldn't hire him or her, or that's what you're only willing to do. But don't get like connected to what the founder is paying. And if you see that the founder is doing that, try to push it. And I know it's a hard thing, but try. And not daring distinguishing is also something that we often see. A reluctance to share equity, which brings us directly to a best practice. In the end, with compensation, what does it do? It incentivizes certain behavior. So if you want a management team member to behave like an owner of the company, you should incentivize him or as an owner of the company, which implies bringing equity to the table. So it's what we recommend to do is like really think what behavior do you want to incentivize, what's the market paying. But even with what's the market paying, we always recommend our clients to speak to slightly more expensive, and sometimes we have cheaper candidates as well than what they think they would need to pay. But always, you saw, again, I go back to the impact of an executive, and even with an executive more so than with anything else, see people and determine for yourself what the value for money is for someone. And because you might be debating 30K on an annual basis, and you saw the impact that someone had. So how relevant is this 30K on an annual basis? If there's a cash constraint, okay, you have a different problem. But don't get too stuck. Be flexible is what I would advise. And always test it in the market with candidates, whatever, to ensure that you know what needs to be paid. So this is basically a framework that we use for CFOs. We have different frameworks for different type of roles, where we within the CFO domain see 3 different types of CFOs. So a strategic CFO, which has a broader strategic view on the company, a financial CFO, which is basically around accounting control and ensuring that all the numbers are correct, and the combined CFO, who's very strong on the accounting and control side, and also covers part of the strategic agenda. We have the implied background, we have the earnings, it's a bit education of our client, but a lot of thought has gone into thinking about per role, like what different roles do you have within a certain role? How many people have identified this so far? So type yes if you've also, like, within your organization, whether it's a CFO, CCO, COO, or it's a head of finance or whatever, of the leadership positions, where in what organization. So type yes if you have different roles within a role, and no if you haven't, because I'm not sure how many people have this. Are we getting yes or no's, Adrian? Or
no? It's coming now. So German says yes. Dan asks question marks. Someone says, "Oh no, Dima."
Can the person type yes? I didn't understand the name correctly, but also type like for what position they made the split.
Yes, German Perez.
German Perez.
Yes.
Maybe family of Checo Perez. German, it would be great if you could type that. Very interesting.
What type of roles, German? The role, same role, but different functions. Alex typed no. German, on it. 1 sec. Yeah, we make people work in these webinars.
Exactly.
Very good.
Exactly. I can't do it all by myself. So while German is typing, I will also sort of show the backup slide where we come from. So basically what we always do is we look at all the challenges for a certain role that are there. So this is basically the outcome, but what we do is we write down, like, always what challenges are there for a certain role. Then you can group the challenges. And then from the group challenges, basically it follows what type of solution you need. And for clients, it really helps them, and because clients tend to not think, so your management team in your case generally might not be thinking about the solution, but as always you think, okay, this is my problem, so this is what needs to be solved with a hire. So in the CFO example, like very often you think a CFO is a guy who does the controlling and the bookkeeping, etc. So they will look for a registered controller or a registered accountant. But if there's a very good bookkeeping team and the CEO is not very strategic, and there's a lot of M&A activity or fundraising activity or ERP implementations, if those are the problems and the bookkeeping is good, then your solution is not to go for an RC, RA type of profile, but it goes to a different type of profile than you might have initially thought. So coming from the problems is what really helps you have this conversation, and then you can structure it towards a solution that helps basically define what background does that require, and then from your market research it can follow what should you pay these people. So the numbers here are numbers for the Dutch market, but it's for me not so much about what's exactly on the slide, but it's more about like going deep, because as I said, for an executive to be successful, it needs to be a very specific fit. So you can't have one CFO. You have a specific type of CFO for specific challenges in a specific setting. And the more in depth you can go, the higher the chance that you get the best hire. I don't know if Jermaine...
German replied. He said, I would say for software architects and senior architects that are required to have also mentorship and leadership scope, despite being highly specialized individual contributors. So I would say, so it's the same kind of role, but they ask different requirements, which is often much more of a senior director role due to its impact, for example.
Yeah, it's a very, and that holds for more roles also outside of technology. Indeed, always the component, like to what extent is a very strong functional content background required versus to what extent is there more focus on managerial skills, because it's very hard to find someone combining a very strong content background, content focus, and managerial skills. So indeed, then you get to already different profiles. So you get to the content, the managerial, and the combined, which will be the scarcest and the most expensive. So thanks for your contribution, a very valid point. Then the selection process, of which most people might think, yeah, I know how to run a recruitment process because this is basically my job. But still, I would like to stress, and maybe you do this for all roles, that would be great, but it should be very specific for your executive roles. So don't have too few candidates in the mix that you know that are not necessarily directly suitable, but that you like or whatever. Being happy with good candidates, too few, not being aware of what else is out there. And focusing too early on one candidate holds for every process. A chaotic process also holds for everyone, but the impact is higher if you lose an executive candidate than if you lose a different candidate. And because you saw the impact of an excellent leader versus a good leader, and of course, an excellent engineer versus a middle engineer, an excellent recruiter versus a middle recruiter also has impact with the same differences, but the impact is bigger. So really be cautious, because you do want here specifically to hire the best of the best. And what we very often see, these leaders tend to be engaging and tend to be very able to tell their story, and you could have a tendency to go along with that and think, okay, this is all like great, and you think along, okay, this is relevant what this person has done, but really stick to your objectivized criteria that you defined that you are hiring for. And we've seen it often. We work with very standardized scorecards that everyone feels, okay, we've had a great conversation. And then you fill out the scores along the dimensions that are relevant for the role. And then you think, okay, it's an okay fit, but it's not as good as I thought when we were speaking, because this person is very engaging. So be very cautious and objective. And as I said, especially with leaders that are by definition engaging, be cautious. And so what do you do? Be very tailored in these processes. Be willing to keep the same steps, but deviate slightly where needed in order to facilitate these people, because they come from managerial positions as well, a different organization. So it will be hard for them as well to free up time. And of course they should, because otherwise they are not committed, but be flexible working with them. Ensure to build a pipeline, over communicate, be really aware of what key stakeholders you involve. And especially on the management side, people should have a lot of commitment because they are hiring their colleague. And be also transparent on where are you, what's going on, and ensure that they do the same towards you. But more than with your regular processes, be very cautious, because the impact is higher, and that mainly has to do also with the flexibility that you in my opinion should show in this process. So this is very old research, and I can't ever, I've looked for it often, but I think it's from 89 or 94, but based on a very big sample. But it doesn't seem that it has been repeated very often, which is a bit of a surprise for me. But it's still, as I said, I believe in the validity. So it basically gives you an estimate, an R value, and an R value of 1 is optimal predictive power. Of different measures that you use in recruitment to assess the suitability of someone for a job. Where it's interesting to see that unstructured interviews only have 0.35 predictive value, which means that if you flip a coin, you have more chance to have predictive value than if you do an unstructured interview. The work sample gets you to 0.54. And the work sample is basically like, for example, for technology profiles, it would be a coding test, so doing something that they would actually need to do in real life. And that's one of the 3 that gets you to the odds, which are better than flipping a coin. And the good news is that the combination of structured interviewing and work sample test brings you to 0.86, which is quite good in terms of predictive value. Who has ever seen these kind of statistics, and whether it's exactly this or similar, I don't really care.
We're still waiting.
Exciting.
Guys, very interesting. Never seen before, says Paul. Honestly, no, says Alex.
Yeah. I was shocked by the unstructured interview predictive value.
Yeah,
it's a very big and old interview, but that is basically if you have no clue what you are asking, that you can better flip a coin and spare the hour than go sit across a candidate. So that brings us to the job sample with the highest predictive value. So this is in Dutch, so not for. I think in Kuwait they don't speak Dutch, and I think there are various other countries I saw. But it's about like, what does a job sample look like? So it's an extensive document for us, for a CEO. It's a 3-pager, which gives very practical. Various practical things to do, and you should mimic something that they need to do in real life. As I said, with a developer, it's easy. You can do coding, but this example, basically, we send the CEO to a location. We let them speak to many people to understand, okay, what's going on, which has another purpose, because this person can see what people will I be working with. So do I think that I can build an organization with these people? And these people can see, okay, is this a leader that we want to work for? So you already create some support within the organization to hire this person. So they get to interviewing, and then basically after they've spoken to all these people, you ask them to define their strategic priorities and their annual plan, which shows you whether they can think strategically, and also when you then discuss these strategic priorities, whether you can work together in an effective way. And that's for a CEO very important. Like, is he strategic? Does he know where the business needs to go? Are we aligned on that? And can we exchange thoughts on that? And then very often we include something like a 30, 60, 90-day plan. In Matchr, we also use it. In Apollo, we also use something like that because it has the highest predictive value. But also only having someone, and with the CEO, you could argue to what extent it could be sufficient, but generally you don't want only someone to be able to tell where it's going in 10 years or 5 years or what the strategy is, but also like, can someone think what it means in day-to-day operations to realize this? So don't take this whole slide, but think about it in a way like, what can we let someone do that mimics what he or she needs to do in real life, and ensure that way that you get a good understanding. And combined with structured interviewing, it brings you a 0.86 validity. And as I said, you want the highest validity on everything, but especially with the people that have the highest impact on the organization. So what does a process look like? We always recommend for C-level a very elaborate round zero. It's 60 to 90 minutes, so it's very long. It's testing the waters. Again, I had the CFO example in it. So, for example, you are hiring a CFO. This person is at an organization of 500 people. You need them to join an organization of 60 people. They are very busy. So if you approach them, they need to be really committed to start with the interview process, but very often, and you think that you're sitting on gold, and they think, okay, what's this shitty company with 60 people? They will do some research and think, okay, could be interesting. You might tell them something about it, but it's important for them with low effort to speak to the key decision makers, to understand what's this business about, because there's a very big mismatch in terms of the information they have. And for executives, it's very important to understand in what executive team will they be working. So for them, it's very important to directly see the CEO or some other C-level person, but preferably the CEO, because it has multiple purposes. It shows them like, okay, can I work with this person? Is this a leader that I want to follow? But it also shows to them, I'm important to the CEO because he's very busy, but he wants to have a random coffee, well, not random, but a sort of random coffee with me to identify whether I can be his or her CFO. So in terms of experience, it's great. And then the first round could be interviews with stakeholders, preferably again to management team members. Probably, potentially recruitment is involved, mostly on culture fit. And then you go to the job sample. I would say the CEO, other board members, direct reports for the reasons that I mentioned before. And then often there's a meeting with the investor or supervisory board, more confirmatory. And then you have the reference checks, and the reference checks, as many people know, it's always hard to get sort of a good reference check. At Matchr, at some point, we wanted to cut off the reference check because we thought everyone just say, yeah, you should hire this person. And then we had 2 reference checks where they said, at least in one explicitly, you shouldn't hire that person. So now we're decided to keep the reference check. But the reference check, they will say positive things, but it's more about, do you get consistency out of it? Does it confirm your view? Because if it doesn't confirm your view of all these rounds, then you have a problem. Because then apparently something is mismatched between what you've seen in all these rounds and what people say about this person. As I said, it's optional to have a recruiter in this process. Why is that? It's for people. It's people can generally assess people sort of up to their level and not people one level higher. So it's best to have like management team members involved because it's their level, and then Functionally, it could be slightly different, of course, but the higher, the better, in order to be able to assess whether it's distinctive quality or not. For you as a recruiter, it will be very hard to establish why is a CEO a good CEO, because how much do you know and have you seen about being a good CEO yourself as well? And that doesn't mean that you're not important in the process. You're crucial in the process, because you do the selling, making sure that it's a smooth process, that the interactions are key for someone to want to join. And when it's right, you have initiated the whole process, put it in action, knew what to look for, and organized it all. But the stakeholders to be involved in the process should be really as high as possible, because people can only assess up to their own level. Potentially one level higher, you can see, okay, this person is better than me, but people can't understand, okay, is he 10% better than me, 50%, 100%, or more? So always keep that in mind. So then about convincing a candidate to join the team. I will speed up a bit given the time, and I think this is the sort of most straightforward, of which I already repeated some things. So the core thing is your management team, your CEO wants to hire a key colleague. If there's no commitment from the management team in this process, what will this person think about how you will work together? And the rest is be aware of what's happening, etc. But it's really, really crucial that you push your management to show involvement, because otherwise, what would they think about if they don't want to spend time on hiring their key colleague? What would it be like in real life? So then, working with a headhunter, there are various reasons to go to a headhunter. It could be because they can approach candidates that you can't approach. It can be because they have a super relevant network. It can be because they know how to assess and have more insight on the performance of people. It can be because they have more resources for elaborate market mapping. There are many reasons to work with us, but what are the worst and the best practices? That we see very often, especially with scale-ups, that they basically pick on price. And as you've seen with the impact of someone, you could very much argue whether price is your number one differentiator. Providing them pushing a more expensive one in unattractive commercial conditions is also very questionable whether that's the best thing. I will get back to that. And treating them as a supplier instead of a partner. Because for this role, you need all parties to be aligned and committed in order to get the best person in. And so what should you do? Speak to people that have worked with headhunters. So don't go with the first one you've seen or where you've seen a marketing message from. Apollo is notably very bad at marketing. So that's also why we don't recommend going with marketing, but really go with the experience of people, and then be specific, understand the specific experiences. Is it comparable to what you are going to do or not? Run a strict and smooth process with them. Do it jointly. Don't see them as the competition. You are the recruiter and the headhunter, and you are competing. No, you're not competing. You're working together to get the organization, the best person out there. So really collaborate. And what always strikes me is the alignment of incentives. And often with negotiations, and I know that sometimes there are boundaries, etc. But I get clients that negotiate, and I tell them, okay, if I have a similar search, someone is paying me twice as much, you want to discuss 50% of the fee. Where do you think my incentives are to really spend my time, resources, and effort? So we have a very strict pricing policy, because I don't want to work with low incentives, or then still taking it on and thinking, okay, I might place it. So either we work with our conditions, which have very limited wiggling room, or not. But also for yourself, really think about then, if you would push us out for that reason, is that the right call that you're making? Because everyone looks at ROI. So if the ROI of the headhunter gets lower, what will they bring you? And of course, you should be strict. You don't need to overpay, and even with high fees, you should be strict on output and what do you pay them for. But that are side conditions to negotiate on. But really work with them as a partner, I can say from my perspective, the most successful searches are where incentives are aligned, where we really work together in a very cooperative setting. You can pass on information, you can play the influencing game on which you have an additional participant. And so really use them in the right way when you work with them. I hope that this gives you a view on, even though you will have seen many similarities, on where there are differences, what to do, what to take into account, and what's the key to be successful to hire and strengthen your C-level, the C-level of your organization. Questions?
Maarten, is this the final presentation?
Yeah, the final presentation is
Yeah. Okay.
my email address for those interested.
Yeah. Okay, great. Awesome. All right. Perfect on the clock, Maarten. Thank you so much, Maarten. Super interesting. And we definitely had a few questions still in the chat. Dan asked the question: what will be a good USP to select a headhunter?
A good USP?
Yeah. So what should you look for in a headhunter?
Good question. So it's partly about relevant experience, but we've been we've built this company since 2016, so we've done a lot of new stuff as well, successfully, arguably. But it is good if someone has an ID. I think the most relevant thing is, do they understand your business and do they understand your role? Because as I said, it's really about getting the fit as perfect as possible, giving the impact. So the most important thing is that you speak to them and that you feel, okay, they understand my business, they understand the specifics of the role, and then we already try to iterate with profiles in the commercial stage, which is sort of risky, but it gives also our clients really, before they buy something from us, comfort that we are understanding what they need. And that's what you want. You want this comfort. So I think it's crucial that they understand the business, the role, and that they can elaborate how they can find this person for you in a good and credible way with some track record.
Yep.
For example, what always, I didn't have that in the presentation, but what
Mark,
always...
can you close your screen so we come up on the big screen? Yeah, perfect. Better.
Yeah, so one addition is that very often a headhunter is hired very much because of their network, which is the most overstated reason to hire a headhunter. Of course, a network is relevant, but it's more about, okay, can you find everyone available? Because for people on C-level positions, they are committed to the company, as I said before, and especially CEOs. So they are not on the market for years. So you can't have everyone, even GDPR-wise, in your database all the time. And so no one has the perfect network. I know Egon Zehner well, which is one of the most established executive search brands for corporate. And even for them, every search is about finding many new candidates. So don't overestimate the network and the rest of the USPs I just mentioned.
Okay, that's a great one. Assessment test. So Salama said, we usually use Thomas International for C-level. It's a psychometric test, gives great insights about a candidate's suitability for the job profile. Do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, I do. I stopped. Do we have many questions, Aad? Otherwise,
one more.
Okay, I can quickly go back to screen sharing, I hope. Because I had also the assessment in there, which gives you not necessarily my... Okay. Oh. So what does it say about assessment centers? 0.37. So it's better to flip a coin. And then, of course, it's a generalization of assessment. But I think what assessments are useful for is for personality partly IQ, but be careful and really think, okay, what IQ level do you exactly need, and what's too much, and what you need, and are you going to differentiate on that one, or how important is it for you? For personality, we do think it's good, but then more as a discussion starter. So you get more insights based on what they filled out, contrary to what you get out of conversation, and use it to structure your conversation. Of course, there will be better and worse assessments. There are so many assessments out there, and we've seen assessments where, I mean, I could do a separate webinar on the outcomes of what kind of freaks these people are, according to an assessment, like multiple times successful CEOs that are getting. So be really cautious. So use it. I would recommend use it for personality assessment. As you can see here, it's slightly better than unstructured interviewing, worse than personality tests. So be cautious, and then do research on what you then use, and especially how you use it.
All right, one last question from Dima. What test task, third round in your slides, CEOs usually do, and what are the best practices to check their skills? So it's also like kind of like similar to I think this slide. So can you give an example?
Yeah, so with the CEO, it's very much about the strategic vision. This person needs to tell where your company needs to go. So the case should be much more strategic. And as I said, the discussion with the shareholder, because this person will be the closest to the shareholders, and the one that needs to do what they want this person to do. So you need to ensure that A, he is strategic, and B, that if you have a difference of opinion, that still you have a constructive way of solving for that. The second one is leadership and stakeholder management, which you partly get from stories, but and that's why in the job sample we recommend involve like peers, involve direct reports. Also partly have them do some convincing towards those people to try to grasp whether they can engage an audience and engage their people to go along with them. And then I think what's even with a CEO very important, can this person translate this to action, to programs? What needs to happen? What do I need to manage on to ensure that things get executed? And then you have specific skills, like for CEOs, curiosity, but I think for almost every role is one of the most important things, because the business is going in a way, but you always need to be on the lookout for, okay, what else is out there, and is that something that we should go into? But the first three are for us crucial in these assessments.
Okay. I mean, we're on the clock, Maarten. In 1 minute, how important is the personality of a person when you want to hire for a C-level role?
Good question. Very important. I think there I might actually be sort of short on knowledge myself. I have a few CEOs that I hold in extremely high esteem. You have all these one-liners like culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think culture more than personality is key. And some of the CEOs says, okay, no matter how well my people perform every half a year, they are rated on culture. If it's not a fit, they go out because it destroys your organization. So it's related to personality. And I think culture is more important than personality, because as long as the different personalities fit within the culture, I don't see a real problem.
Cool. Awesome. Maarten, on the clock, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Guys, I am very excited to hopefully see you again next week. Of course, we will send you the recording somewhere later this week. Next week, we are actually going to talk about culture, how to build a strong company culture with Ingeborg van Harten, super experienced in this field. Very excited to have her as one of our keynotes. Thank you so much for your questions. If you want to connect with Maarten, connect with him on LinkedIn, Maarten from the Kwaak. You were able to find him. Maarten, once again for an amazing session, and hopefully see everyone next week. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.